Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by White House reporter Naomi Lim. Naomi, we haven't had a formal re-election announcement from President Biden yet, but that would really be a formality at this point, wouldn't it?
Just like the drip, drip, drip with the classified documents, I feel like we're getting teased with this this re-election campaign. Mm-hmm. We saw President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris speak to the Democratic National Committee in Philadelphia, which I sort of thought was a soft launch to their campaign. They were testing out a couple of lines. And then, of course, we had the State of the Union, where he sort of repeated about 12 times, according to the official transcript, let's get the job done. Mm-hmm. Now, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre has been asked, does that mean for the next 2 years or the next 6 years?
Right.
And obviously, she...
Cliffhanger.
I know, but she loves, well, to make it sort of worse is that she kind of hangs on to that Hatch Act. So she kind of has put off those discussions. But as we see the president, this sort of newly invigorated president, I think that State of the Union, the combativeness of it with the House Republicans particularly, I think has really energized him as he goes out into swing states and sort of pitches the things that he's done and the things that he still wants to do. Mm-hmm. And I think, looking at the schedule ahead, aides have sort of said that they're going to host, between himself, the vice president and cabinet officials host sort of like 30 events across 20 states. So they're really going hard on this, particularly given polling sort of suggests that there's a disconnect between what the president has done and whether people are actually feeling the effects of it or sort of credit him for those successes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, he did a little of this during the midterm elections, but as you mentioned, there is a pretty big difference in that he's going to swing states this time.
Exactly. I think he's sort of, we sort of saw him when go down to Georgia, something that he was a bit tentative to do, but he was there for MLK Day. Mm-hmm. He was in Wisconsin, Florida, and there are lots of sort of stops along the way. So I think that also shows a renewed confidence in his place in the party after I think there was a lot of sort of inter-family discussions over who would be the best person to be the standard bearer going into 2024. Mm-hmm.
And so there's a voting bloc that's been pretty important in recent elections, has been trending away from the Democratic Party for really a generation now, that President Biden seems to be locked into trying to win back and to appeal to. Who are they?
They're blue-collar workers. Mm-hmm. Now, it's sort of, it was integral to his State of the Union speech. He sort of rolled out this blue-collar blueprint, which is, rolls off the tongue nicely as well.
Of course.
But
no blue material.
No. But aides were really quick to sort of say, this is not the first time he said this. He actually used that exact same phrase during his first address to a joint session of Congress. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of a return to first-phase principles is what they've told me. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of telling and interesting. I think we've sort of seen his attention be distracted by things like the Ukraine war, things like the coronavirus pandemic. But then also what's kind of interesting is I was looking back through the exit polls, and it showed that there was a 10% improvement among Republicans when it came to white voters without a college degree. Mm-hmm. So it went from they had a 34% advantage in comparison to 2018. And so I think they're seeing that they really have to put effort into this voting bloc because as Scranton Joe likes to say, these are his people.
Right. I mean, there is sort of a subtext. Maybe assuming former President Donald Trump is his opponent again, and maybe someone like him, but there seems to be a subtext of it of like, I'm bringing back manufacturing jobs. I'm blue collar man, not orange man.
Exactly, and so I think and it kind of lays into what we sort of were talking about in terms of what he's achieved. I mean, things like infrastructure, things like the CHIPS package, all of that sort of stuff is investments into these communities that will actually, some of them like Ohio, for example, will be a competitive Senate race at least in 2024.
Mm-hmm, right. And Sherrod Brown, generally, the Democratic incumbent's generally been pretty fortunate in his election cycles, but this one could be the first one where Republicans might be favored. You've done some writing and reporting on a voting bloc that President Biden is trying to appeal to that maybe, as the oldest man to ever serve as president, could be off message, even though they're a very important voting bloc. What are you talking
well,
about?
Well, I kind of saw it as like he was talking to his own people, given he could be 82 by his hypothetical second inauguration.
Sure.
But the voting bloc that we're speaking of is seniors. And basically that's a dovetail between his focus on, this this idea that Republicans want to cut Medicare, Social Security, those entitlement programs, and the way that sort of affects sort of seniors. And I think it's kind of interesting, he's returned to Florida, which he did also before the midterms, but he's going back again. And it offers sort of this the perfect table setter when it comes, because Senator Rick Scott, the Florida, the junior Florida senator,
Right.
is the one that sort of who's become sort of the representative of this idea, basically. He was the one that proposed it when he was in charge of the Senate Republican campaign arm. And so going there, making this pitch to not only his home state, but also a state that's very heavily populated with an older demographic is sort of like that potent mix. And again, I was looking at exit polls. Democrats lost, a 10% advantage with Republicans when it came to that demographic of voters older than 65 between the 2018 election and the 2022 election. So it's something that I think he wants to, if you are going to try and get as many votes as you can, and this is sort of a way that you can do two things at once.
Sure. And so it's kind of fitting, I guess, in a way, so that we haven't had a formal presidential announcement. So we're saving the main meal, and now we're having the early bird special.
Exactly.
Thank you, Naomi. You can read Naomi and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.